Before we get to some of the shows that took place, Raw and SmackDown, and there's things to talk about, let's talk about a few things first. Jim, something we did not have an opportunity last week to talk about because it happened during a period of time we were getting ready for these shows and we had a lot of things planned, but the passing of Bill Mercer last week.
Yes, and 99 years old. I guess except for a fellow from Mexico, he may have been the oldest living wrestling personality or something to that effect. But it was great to see they covered a lot more than his wrestling involvement in the articles. Obviously, most of it was wrestling websites, but he was famous in other circles, and they covered him primarily for his other exploits. He'd been a teacher at North Texas for like 40 years in broadcasting journalism. He had been a reporter. He'd done wrestling back into the 50s and then took a break for quite a while because he was a real life news reporter and broadcaster. He is the guy who actually officially informed Lee Harvey Oswald that he was being charged with the murder of John F. Kennedy because he was covering it on the scene for one of the local stations. He broadcast all kinds of sports. That's how Fritz got him involved again. He had done it in the 50s, but then Fritz brought him back because he was so well known in the community and he was a real sports voice to those people. It was like having your major football or basketball commentators and whatever your market is doing the wrestling show too. And he did the world class show up until almost to the end. But my God, 40 years ago when I knew him, he was almost 60. That's just insane. I mean, he's had an incredible life going from, early television and broadcasting to real news to multiple sports to fame in wrestling and being a teacher. He's got everything in the world named after him in broadcasting and journalism and things like that in Texas. It was just he's a really nice guy and really he was like Lance Russell for the people of Texas. Does that make any sense? He was just a nice guy. He was kind of local, but still they knew he was a big deal and they could believe him when he talked to him. And he wasn't a professor like Gordon Soley. He wasn't really teaching him anything. He was just letting them know what was going on, and he had the inside scoop.
I almost feel like credibility wise, maybe not a perfect analogy, but similar to Ed Whalen with fans in
Oh yeah,
Western
but
Canada.
much less pomposity.
Right, just in terms of the
Yeah,
credibility, Ed Whalen was credible before wrestling and beyond wrestling. He brought that to wrestling. Bill Mercer, same thing. The
yeah.
comparison with Lance Russell, I almost feel the comparison's better to talk about two guys that started as outsiders that never looked down on wrestling, that understood it, that could talk to it. Whenever I saw a Bill Mercer interview, whether it was in any of the Von Erich documentaries or various things throughout the years, he never looked down on wrestling. He understood that it was an important part of his career. And, I think some people do. And I think the people, I always found this perspective very interesting because he was such a credible guy doing something that a lot of people, especially then maybe, would mock every now and then. He did it and he had no problem with it.
Well, and it's a good comparison with Lance, and they both lived to be 90, whatever. Also, and just went so many eras of broadcasting. But Bill was even more. I get Lance got once he got involved with wrestling in Jarrett's company. That had been 25 years later or whatever. And he was mostly a television executive, and then Jarrett's company took off, and he just hired Lance, full time at that point. Well, full time. Lance still was more closely involved with the promotion. He did the Saturday morning TV, the Monday night announcing another house show once a month, and that was full time for Lance. But he didn't again go back out and go into real television again. So Mercer was just, it was amazing. He kept his finger in everything. And but at the same time, this guy, he's such a experienced broadcaster. At the time I'm there, I'm 23 or 24 or whatever. And he did the local promos. So, he was trying not to break, but every once in a while you could see he had the twinkle in his eye when I'd try to do that. I'd try to break him because Mark Lawrence was impossible. It was like Mark Lawrence. I told him one time, I said, you look like you ought to be standing on top of a wedding cake. He was just like a Ken doll. He never broke. That Mark, a nice guy, but he had just that dry, monotonistic mood that he had. Well, it
Oh.
seems that the chainsaw has just penetrated Sunshine's abdomen.
The winner of the match, Kevin.
Kevin, yes, and I think he's a preacher and like in real life, but he's just the most even person you've ever seen, and you couldn't get him to crack or do anything. But Bill Mercer, every once in a while, and the Freebirds tormented him, but I just tried to get him with one-liners, and he'd get the twinkle in his eye.
What'd you
But
think? What'd you think when he went full C. Everett Koop, and he had just the beard, no mustache?
oh, that he had the regular face when I was there, and then he started doing different hair designs. I don't know. It was a little. He was just experimenting. Maybe as he turned 60, he wanted to see what different type of face warmer.
See, I always liked him on World Class. When I first started seeing that as a kid on ESPN, the reruns, I liked him even though he was different. And, when I first started reading various newsletters, a lot of the smart fans didn't because he didn't call the moves. And, again, it's a very different style than a Jim Ross, let's say. But I always liked it. A sleep hold. I always liked the way he called it in the credibility, but especially in the vignettes, and World Class TV eventually had a lot of those. My favorite always being him going to Jimmy Garvin's house. Jimmy Garvin? Jimmy Garvin! You open the door. Yeah. And then Precious and Jimmy Garvin are in there.
Like Chris Hansen. It's Chris Hansen with Dateline or whatever the fuck. And then if you would see Sunshine in the bikini or the robe or whatever, and you'd almost see Bill Mercer's face turning red.
That was Precious answered the door in just a shirt. Right. Just a shirt. Just one of Jimmy's shirts. And then Jimmy Garvin answered the door and go, Bill Mercer, I can't believe you came to my house.
The funny thing was the shirt fit perfectly. And it was amazing. But yeah, because he was the straight guy. He was a straight guy like Lance was. Like you could, the announcer was not a gimmick. So you could trust him. He's the sane one with these crazy people. And it put the attention on the talent. But you had to play it straight. You couldn't wink it to people. Or it'd be like it is today. And it'd just be... But for all, the funniest thing I ever heard Bill Mercer say wasn't on purpose, because he wasn't a funny guy on the air. But remember when John Nord was Nord the Barbarian, and he was from Minnesota. He was really from Minnesota, John Nord, but the Barbarian, he's a Viking, right? Kind of gimmick, not as gimmicked up as the WWE Vikings were here lately, but he had the helmet with the horns on, and he's got the goddamn Viking fucking chest thing or whatever. And Bill Mercer is trying to say he's introduced from Norway, right? And Bill Mercer, during the course of the thing, is trying to recall his home country and trying to remember where this fucking Viking is from. And he said, well, there you have it, Nord the Barbarian from Norwegia. And I said, God. This is a guy who's done major fucking news, and it can happen to anybody, but it was so fucking funny. From Norwegia, Nord the Barbarian.
I always wish he had gotten a chance to be the one to call the Flair Kerry Von Erich title change instead of Mark Lawrence. I guess Bill Mercer, He had something else that day, so we got Mark Lawrence. And not that match was the greatest of their matches, but I always felt like Bill Mercer should have been the one doing it.
Yeah, and that was the thing. There was something, even then he was doing, I can't remember what it was, if I ever knew, but it was some type of either the mainstream sports or mainstream or something with the college maybe that he was affiliated with or whatever.
When you think about all the tragedies that hit World Class, at least the ones they talked about on air, he was always the one delivering the news. I can almost visualize him sitting there. We've reached another sad milestone here.
Yeah.
You know, it was always Bill Mercer. He had that credibility, and it was a different show when he was. You know, if you think about GWF, you know, Pedicino and beyond, it was always like Doyle King or, you know, just different people, especially after the Atlanta boys left.
And I love Doyle if he's
Yeah,
listening, by the
no
way.
disrespect.
Doyle and our friends.
But he wasn't Bill Mercer.
He
You know,
wasn't Bill
just,
Mercer.
you know, think about what it would have been like if Bill Mercer every now and then showed up and, you know, called some of the matches with some of the characters of the GWF. But there it is, Bill Mercer, world-class announcer, Texas broadcasting legend, Beyond Wrestling, and yeah, I guess go to YouTube, check out some of the footage of World Class TV if you've never seen it. If you're one of the younger listeners who's never seen World Class TV, see what Bill Mercer was all about.